I'm going to introduce Bill Aulet, and then I'm going to let Bill introduce the panelists. Bill Aulet is all things innovation and entrepreneurship as it relates to MIT. He is the director of the Martin Trust Center. He's a professor of the practice at the MIT Sloan School.
Wow.
I hear he plays and shoots some hoops.
Wow.
In his spare time. Is that
Gold
true?
medal.
Bill Aulet apparently was a professional basketball player. Is that true?
I was.
Wow.
In England.
I mean, Bill has the energy of an entrepreneur.
All right, let's end this right now.
And he's going to introduce the rest of his panelists.
Thank you, Sinan. You left me hanging there, Sinan. All right. So first of all, it's a pleasure to see everybody out here. And I want to thank Sinan and David, where's David, for arranging this and inviting us here. It's good to have, we're at MIT, diversity is important. And we have a lot of intellectuals at MIT. And I'm here as part of the diversity program to have a pseudo-intellectual here. You get that one, Bengt? I'll explain it to you later. Anyway, so I think one of the key things at MIT is it's always been an institution of mind and hand. Knowledge for knowledge's sake is not enough. Knowledge to apply it in the world is what's very important. And entrepreneurship is a key fundamental pillar of that. And that's why we call it the third pillar of MIT. There's research, teaching, and entrepreneurship. And that's not me, that's Mark Gorenberg, who's the chairman of MIT. So today we're going to talk about what effect does AI have on the entrepreneurial scene, which is really what's going to transform the world. So I'm very excited about our panel today. We've got 3 well-dressed, learned panelists, and 4 of them have really good content, and 1 does not. It's up to you to figure out which one that is. But on a serious note, we've got different perspectives here, which I think you'll find very, very interesting. And to start with, I want to start with Lily Lyman, who is a partner at Underscore Venture here in Massachusetts and has been looking at this area and is very well respected. Up and comer, looking at this, she's going to give us a perspective from an investor standpoint. So Lily, the floor is yours.
Sure, thanks for having me. Let's see if I can undo the well-respected piece in the next 5 minutes. But nice to meet everyone. I'm Lily, I'm at Underscore VC. For context, we're an early stage firm based here in Boston. We invest primarily at the pre-seed and seed stages in the world of B2B software. And so that's where my lens comes from largely. And we're very bullish on Boston. We invest everywhere, but over half our capital's here. Over a third of our capital comes from places like MIT. So we're very, very excited about this ecosystem, and particularly now in this age of AI. So for some quick sort of market context, we're seeing a lot of exciting activity. Venture capital dollars are up. They're at $55 billion in the US, has been deployed this year so far. And a lot of that is driven by the opportunity behind AI. We're seeing tons of capital go into some of the big foundational models. You've probably read and heard about a lot of those, and I know we've talked about some of them today. But we're also seeing a lot of capital being deployed in the opportunities around that. So things at other parts of the infrastructure tech stack and then also at the applications layer. Then I think there's actually another sort of derivative piece of opportunity that we're seeing, which is around sort of cybersecurity. We're seeing a lot more, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about it, and some of the other panels touched about sort of safety, observability, compliance. And then there's a whole other group that actually we don't really invest in, but we're seeing a lot of conversation around energy consumption. And we're seeing a lot of startups here at MIT think about that, and what are the implications for that going to be. The way that we see it, I feel like there's sort of 3 waves of AI from an investing perspective. I think we've seen the first one, which is really around AI as UI, and then AI as a co-pilot or assistant. So help me make this sales forecast. I think right now, and interestingly, that wave happened very quickly. I think we see it, we're now in sort of the second wave, and there's sort of 2 buckets in the second wave. One is around AI as automation, so agentic workflows, which our friend from Salesforce talked a lot about. His comment on, I think we'll have 1 billion agents within Salesforce in a certain amount of time struck me, but I believe that's probably true. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about workflow automation opportunities. And then I think we're also we're hitting the second wave of AI as a thinker, as a researcher, as a reasoner. And so that goes from, can you help me make a sales forecast, to an example of, can you propose the next product that we should launch and why? And then I think we will start to see this third wave, which is really around AI as an employee. So can you then build that product for me? AI as a whole company. So can you handle all of my customer support? And then ultimately, like, will we see things as AI as an entire industry, like marketing and advertising and things like that? So I think that's kind of where we're headed. I think we're sort of in the early inklings of wave 2, but it happened really fast. So lots of exciting things.
Wow, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
We finished?
It's giving you a lot of
What?
tips.
I think it's really interesting because we were just in the green room, we were just talking about every AI thing has the Gartner hype cycle.
Yeah.
And we're in the hype cycle. Yet I kind of feel like we're in the hype cycle for some of it, and we're not in the hype cycle for other parts. And I'll come back to you on this, Heidi, as well. It's like, this is not like some of the other things. This is like the internet.
Yeah.
Like, this is when Mark Andreessen said, software is going to eat the world. It has eaten the world. And now we're in AI is going to eat the world. And I think that, yes, there's some parts that are overhyped, but I think you have to be very careful because this is going to be ubiquitous. It's just going to be like software. How do you handle that as a VC?
It's exactly the challenge that I think a lot of VCs are facing. And I've talked to a lot of friends who are sort of, it's not that they're sitting on their hands. I think nobody wants to be sitting on their hands in this environment. And actually, I think the flip side, I'm seeing people get off the bench, if you will. If we're going to do sports analogies, the whole panel. I think.
Why do you look at him when you do
I don't
sports
know.
analogies?
I always look at
Look down here.
I played college sports. I sat on the bench a lot. I think people recognize how tectonic this shift is and are saying, I got to be part of this. So we're seeing it from founders and people who are jumping in. We're seeing repeat founders come back and say, I got to be part of this next wave. And we're seeing it from investors who retired and are now coming back and saying, this is tectonic. I got to be a part of it. But I think the noise is one of the hardest parts. And we see, I don't see a pitch deck that doesn't have AI in it at some point. And so you do have to weed through the noise. And I think the other thing that's tricky is, like, we spend a lot of time trying to think deeply about where is value really going to accrue, because I think a lot of investors are going to lose a lot of money in the next 5 to 7 years. But I think there's also going to be extremely exciting value created. And so just as an example, I think the number of sort of co-pilots for engineers and developers, we've seen a gazillion of them. And it's still a very real opportunity, but how do you sort of distinguish between them? So I think, maybe we'll talk about it a little later, what we look for in an entrepreneur has shifted a little bit because things are changing so fast.
Yeah. We're going to come back to that for sure. But I think that, of course, every time there's one of these tectonic changes, people lose a lot of money. They lost a lot of money in the internet, but
Totally.
People really underestimated the internet. People underestimated software, certainly. So for perspective, our philosopher here, ML Carr, two-time NBA champion with the Boston Celtics. You've seen, yeah, you can clap for that. Just to be clear, he doesn't have a gold medal, though. But you've seen a lot of changes, and by the way, he's not just a basketball player. He has a fund in the AI. He has an entrepreneur there. He's been on the board of major companies like New Balance. You've seen this over a time. What's your take? How do you see AI affecting? How do you see this playing out?
Well, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be a part of the panel and being here.
Oh, by the way, you did apply to MIT. I just learned that. You told me that.
Yeah, I did. We're not hiring when I applied. Joke. Anyway, the evolution, I was very fortunate to play for in the NBA, and especially for the Celtics for a couple of championships. That was sort of the road that I took to get to where I wanted to be, because deep down within me, I love technology, and I say that without any reservations, simply because of the fact that when I left the game, I started this company, and the company I started was here in New England, and my company that I started became the first EDI participant with Digital Equipment Corporation, if you remember DEC. We were the first one to use EDI, and that they could look and see exactly what we had stock for them, deliver the goods on time, change the game. No big warehouses and all those things. It was just the way we used that old Microvax 2000, which some of you probably would know. Some of you say, what in the world is that? It was a system that DEC had, and we used their system to begin the first EDI program for them. And by changing the game on that, we eventually sold the company to a Danish conglomerate. And at that point, to stay with the sports piece of it, I went back and tried to put together a group to buy the Celtics, who was not for sale at the time, and I consistently asked them to allow us to buy the team. And the owner said at the time, anybody that chases us that hard, how would you like to be a part of it? I said, well, what do you mean? He said, we're getting ready to make a management change. Would you like to come and run the organization? And I said, okay, that'd be the second best thing. So I went in and ran the team for 3 years. And but the juices were still flying because I wanted to get back into technology. And so you talk about the internet, I was involved and made a couple investments, hands-on with a couple of companies. One did well, one didn't do well. But eventually, I got to the point where we started this company called Decide Technologies. And Decide Technologies has evolved to Decide AI for obvious reasons. And we did this early in the life of e-commerce. In essence, we were granted 20 patents. And those patents in the early stages of e-commerce, you probably couldn't get some of those patents today because anyone, and I want all the big tech firms that's in here today to understand exactly what I'm saying on this. Anyone that's doing e-commerce most likely is infringing on our patents. Can anybody say Google, Amazon, Meta? Can anybody say those wonderful words? We're in the process of selling that company now. And you'll hear a lot about this over the next few months. But we're in the process of selling that company. And those are some of the ones we'll be talking to. Simply because if Google got it, it's going to be a problem for Amazon and the rest of them. If Amazon got it, it's going to be a problem for the rest of them. Whoever gets this, there's no way around those patents. So the reality of it is, at some point, they got to talk to us. And we've started the process. And so take the message back if any of you are associated with any of the major tech firms that you want to talk to Decide AI pretty quick because it's a horse race and we're going to make this happen. So we're excited about it. And that's why when I say we're getting to the point of AI, and the reason we see this, because when we first started doing putting this really together, not first started, a few years ago, we went to New Balance, which I love New Balance. They made their first basketball shoe for me. I've served on the board for 26 years. That's a commercial. And so in essence, we went to them and said, could you test this for us? And the reality of it is, we did a test with them, over 400,000 of their customers, and lo and behold, we found out that using Decide AI versus NewBalance.com, it was more than twice the sales by virtue of ease of use. It was incredible, quite frankly. And so we put all this together, decided now it's time to go. And you have to understand, and I'm sure most of you do, that it was unstructured data at the time, okay? AI has changed the game. You don't need structured data with AI. AI can find anything out there. And for us, what a blessing that is for us as a company, especially when we're in the market of selling this company or licensing the technology. So it's been a fun ride. It's been great. I've got rid of Larry Bird and Kevin McHale, who played with me with the Celtics. I've now got Lily. I got new Larry Birds and new Kevin McHales, and they are winners in this space. And I'm excited about it because you're right. I saw it the panel before. No one knows where this is going. We know it's going to be huge. We know it's going to be big, but the impact on humanity is the big part of this. We got to figure that out as we go down this path. So I'm excited to be a part of it. Glad to be here today. My kids are involved in their workplaces in AI, and it's sort of interesting that Matter of fact, my son said to me, you know, you want me to go up and be backup for you today? I go, no, I don't. You went to Princeton. I went to Guilford. It's a better school, so I want you to know. No, Guilford is well represented here today. So thank you so much, Bill, and thank you, his audience, for.
Well, there'll be more questions.
Sure.
The pride of Wallace, North Carolina. Heidi, you've had a perspective on this. Heidi, you know, went to school at Brown, trained as a lawyer, partnered up with her brother, starts a company in New York. First talk about that company and then what you learned in that and now how you're applying it here, because that was a big bet that paid off, and now you're betting even bigger.
First of all, I'm very insulted that you don't think I'm well-dressed.
I didn't say it was you. You're very defensive here, Heidi.
There you go.
So I'll start off, I'll tell my story very quickly. Started off when the internet was just being commercialized. My brother and I co-founded one of the first ad networks. We actually created the space that people now refer to as affiliate marketing. It's a company called Linkshare, which we sold to Rakuten for about $500 million in the mid-2000s. Saw this cycle, as you describe it before, sat in front of people who told me the internet would never amount to anything. No one will ever give their credit card. We also got a patent that no one would ever get today. And see a lot of parallels between the time frame that we're in now and the time frame when I first started Linkshare.
So that was a big bet. Let's talk about collective AI. So you moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. You start this company, Collective AI, and it is an even bigger bet. This is a huge bet. And you've put your own money up on this. And there's so much here because, you know, technology was supposed to democratize. But I think we've seen, and maybe Sinan, you'd want to argue about this, I think it's consolidating things more so. And now the price of poker to play in AI, when you look at it, is hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars.
No, I think that's
You're kind of playing in that game. How the heck are you playing in that game?
So I'll talk about what it's Collective AI, and
sorry.
it's short for collective intelligence, which is it's a concept that MIT and your old alma mater, Harvard, spent a lot of time.
We all have issues,
understanding.
Heidi. We all have issues.
We all want to be you, Bill. We all want to be you. So Collective AI is an economic foundation model. We actually study how the world does business. And we started the company when no one was talking about AI. We started it when OpenAI and DeepMind were starting, which a lot of the companies that you see today and a lot of the innovations that you see today that people think are new actually were decades in the making. You're right, my co-founders and I, we invested over $100 million to build the business. And we use the model, our mission is to actually help people and companies prosper. And our theory was that people who are running companies and people who are working in companies often make decisions that have devastating consequences because they don't have the capacity, the data, the computing power to make predictions that AI systems could. So you mentioned, sales and revenue forecasting. It sounds like a trivial thing, but if you can actually forecast revenue with 90% plus accuracy on a daily basis, you can start to optimize all sorts of things. You, for one, if you're running a public company, you're much less likely to make a mistake that forces you to lay off hundreds of people. If you're managing supply chain, you can actually start the process much earlier. You can plan hiring, make hiring decisions in a much more optimal way. So even one insight, and our model produces hundreds, has extraordinarily profound impact. You asked it, the poker stakes of playing in a game today. It does require bigger bets. And it's actually one of the reasons that I think talking about the hype cycle, and I hear a lot of people talking about it, is sort of silly. And the reason I say that is the people who tend to talk about it aren't, the Bills of the world. It's usually the people who are afraid of failing. And so what they're trying to predict is not actually the future, but how they don't look stupid in terms of the investments they're making. Mm-hmm. For people like me, who's an entrepreneur, I start with what I think is inevitable. And I assume that failure will happen in the process. In fact, if you ask Jeff Bezos, Amazon has failed to the tune of billions and billions of dollars because they would never get to be Amazon if they didn't. And what Amazon did that I think was, smarter than anyone else is that they looked and said, this is how people are going to buy, period. So if you say AI is going to happen, period, it means that you're going to have failures along the way, but not investing in it or trying to play a hype cycle is actually guaranteed failure. So I would ask anyone in this room, who is someone who lived through 2001, which was pretty awful, how many people here would buy Amazon stock at its valuation in 2001? How many people here would buy Netflix at its valuation in 2001? How many people here would buy Google, right? Apple, any of those companies. And if you looked at the hype cycle and said at that moment when the world thought the internet was worthless, you would have missed out on all that value. So I see AI in a similar moment right now. It's inevitable. There'll be failures along the way. There'll be misplaced bets. But if you want to win, you better be making the bets now.
So a lot of different things. By the way, we'll have time for questions here. I think the inevitability thing I'll come back to when I come back to what I have to say. But you moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, and you tap me on the shoulder often and say, Bill, it's happening out here more than in the West Coast. You're an East Coast person through and through.
Through and through.
You're
All
a New
black.
Yorker, yeah. Talk about that. I mean, if you're willing to talk publicly, why is it different in the West Coast than the East Coast with regard to AI?
I think it harkens back to what I was just saying. People on the West Coast don't have the debate about failure, right? They don't say, like, do tiny experiments and wait and see. They don't say, gee, I wonder where the hype cycle is. They're already past that. They're already thinking 5 years ahead and 10 years ahead. And in fact, if you walk into the room and you want to have those conversations, you feel out of place. And so I think, look, it's healthy. One of the things that I think makes this country great is the diversity of opinion and thought. And there's colossal failures that happen on the West Coast, and there's colossally big missed bets that happen on the East Coast. But I think that there's an assumption that you have to try things and you have to fail and you have to think big, or it's not worth being in the game.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll come back to that. I don't completely agree, and Lily doesn't agree. I think there are differences out there that you can. They're willing. There's large amounts of money, and they're willing to play on the algorithms and things like that. But I still think they're very efficient ways, and we'll talk about that you can play. And sometimes research has shown. Our colleague Antoinette Shore, who's not here, has shown that startup companies who have less money actually do better than, when times where there's lots of venture capital, those companies end up underperforming in the long term. When the Bezos and these other companies, they started in down cycles, and learning how to really be efficient and hustle and, turns out to be good muscles to have.
So can I just say one thing? I totally agree with you on that front.
We don't have to agree on everything.
Trust me, we don't agree on everything. No, but so I'll say, for LinkShare, we raised $17 million in the totality of the company, and we sold it for $500 million. Our nearest competitor, who did not have the same exit, raised over $250 million. So I think being capital efficient is actually an incredibly important discipline. And I think what you teach about entrepreneurship is incredibly important, because I do think there is a tendency to be very wasteful if you have too much access to capital without a discipline attached to it.
Yes.
I would say, that said, you will see sometimes smaller companies coming out of places where the discipline is limiting, where the imagination is limited. So if you can't think of what should this actually cost to build.
Yeah.
And sometimes the actual cost of building it is hundreds of millions of dollars. If you can't think of that and you start with, I only write checks this big because I think if you have too much money, you're not going to do it, that's the piece I would criticize. The conservatism, the running a business efficiently and smartly and having real discipline being taught to you, that I 100% endorse.
Yeah. Well, Lily, you'll get a chance. Do you want to go now?
Well, actually, I think the distinction you just made is super important, the difference between discipline and imagination. And I do think that there is an element of dream big, go big, talk big, feel big of the West Coast that has a lot of value to it. And I'm a native New Yorker who spent 7 years on the West Coast and then moved back to Boston, so sort of opposite. And I think that that's really valuable. And I do actually think East Coast and Boston needs a little bit more of that dream big, be big, and also talk about our stories. I think we do have a lot of stories in Boston where it's sort of heads down, you build piece by piece by piece by piece, and when all of a sudden you have Klaviyo, which is an $8 billion company. So I think we need a little bit more of that. But I do think there is a lot of data that shows that the discipline piece and some of the constraints that come with having raised less money and bringing that discipline actually do end up in better outcomes. And there was some research that just came out that companies that raised more didn't necessarily get to profitability and didn't grow faster. So I think both can coexist. I think Boston and East Coast is good at discipline. I do think the imagination, dream big thing matters. I also do think there's a nuance, and maybe we'll dig into it more, is it does depend on what you're building. Like if you're building foundational models, those require a lot of capital. And I think that there's a handful of types of venture firms that can invest in that. But I also think there's massive opportunities in other parts of the AI world of opportunity that don't require the same amount of capital. And I think we're seeing more and more companies that are able to do more with less, but still potentially go after massive opportunities. And that's an area that I'm excited to see change a little bit. So I think that nuance, I think they can coexist, discipline and dreaming big. And I think Boston could use a little more of the dream big.
And I didn't want to get this into a sporting event like Celtics versus Lakers, because it's not a zero-sum game. It's
Correct.
I think that both have their benefits, and I just want to make sure that we capture that. But I think sometimes both kind of go too far. When you say blitzscaling, I think Reid Hoffman's great. I thought that was just ridiculous. If you're an entrepreneur and you're teaching someone blitzscaling, that's good for the VC. That is not good for the good for the entrepreneur, 99.999% of the time. Yeah. But let's talk about how do you create more entrepreneurs. Stephanie MacConnell here. I didn't realize we had two East North Carolina people here on the same panel. Wow.
We had to sit next to each other.
A lot of bonding going on. Stephanie here came up from North Carolina, came to MIT, has been in New York City, been in Boston, set up our New York City startup studio. She has this fabulous partnership going on with CCNY right now between MIT because we need more AI literate people. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned in setting that up, Stephanie?
Definitely. So Stephanie MacConnell, thanks everybody. I live in New York, big fan of New York and the East Coast generally. And I run our Delta V program there. So that's our accelerator for MIT student teams. We have a Cambridge branch and we have a New York City branch. And so we always have about 6 teams out in New York. And so getting to see the New York teams come up, and again, we also don't have any applications come through without AI mentioned anymore either.
But hold on a second. We'll get applications that say AI. I'm sure you see this. And then you're like, well, tell me your AI.
Yeah.
And then you're like, wait a second, that's just database technology. That's not AI. It's become this thing of like everything is AI. Yeah. So
it's
we have to be
very
careful.
reminiscent of blockchain technology.
Yes.
It was very much like, do you need to use blockchain technology for this, or could you put it in a folder somewhere? Yeah. So it is similar.
And that's where the hype cycle is kind of a little out of bounds.
Yes.
Sorry.
So that's one of the things that we're
doing. But our
doing
teams
City.
use real AI.
All of them. Only at MIT also do we use real AI. So I'm the director of the New York City operations for the Trust Center. So Delta V is one of the things that we do there. And then the other thing that Bill alluded to is this partnership with the City College of New York, CCNY. Awesome school. Colin Powell went there. Some really, really good graduates from the program, really good engineering school. And we've been trying to work with them for a little while, thinking about how can MIT, there's so much good overlap between the social mobility focus of our schools and how we want to show up in the world and what we want to do for the students. And so how could we work together? And the thing that we are now doing is this co-branded certificate, an MIT CCNY Entrepreneurship and AI certificate. And it started out very vague, so we want to help upskill students into an AI skill set that will allow them to get better jobs and internships. So what can we do? We actually started out thinking that we were going to go to the engineering school, that we were going to help upskill them, and that we were going to create AI engineers and help them get better jobs at big tech companies. And I went out and talked to 2 or 3 dozen Fortune 1000 companies about what are you looking for in your new hires, what types of skill sets, what do you want to be able to do within your organization that you can't do today, and it became very clear that none of them were interested in hiring a straight out of undergrad, maybe engineering, maybe non-engineering student, even with a shiny certificate, into like an AI engineer role or an ML engineer role. And so then we started thinking, okay, then who could we have the most impact on by teaching them this sort of skill set? And it became really clear that every one of these companies requires their new hires to have a comfort level with AI of some kind, but they weren't able to define it. They didn't really have specific skills that they needed them to be able to do, but they just knew that this was a big, important thing, and that they wanted their new hires to be able to leverage it, and they wanted to be bringing that talent into the organization. And so what we ended up finding was that any role these students could get, marketing analyst, sales ops associate, customer service representative, if they could point to hands-on projects that they've been able to do using AI tools, not training models, not coding even necessarily, but how do you, as a non-technical employee, use these tools, that's really compelling to any company that we talk to. So we can go more into sort of how we're gonna implement that, but that was a lot of what the learning was all of these companies have a vague desire for AI talent, but they don't necessarily know what they want it to do or where they want to put it. They just need to know that the students have done something in the space and that they're bringing this talent in. It's almost like, back to blockchain, it's almost like this checkbox, which is just like, does the new talent have AI skills in some way or another? Check, yes, they do. And so how can we make sure that they have those and help them get better jobs and internships and help train the future AI leaders from where they sit right now? And how can we teach them an entrepreneurial skill set so that they know how to identify what those problems are that they could use these tools for? Because for these particular students, their average family income is very different than an MIT student. Their profile is very different than an MIT student. So they don't have the risk profile that allows them to just go out and start a company after undergrad. They're gonna take a job, it's gotta have benefits. And so how do you think about entrepreneurship inside of a company? And how do you have this entrepreneurial skill set, mindset, and toolkit that allows you to identify what the problems are and think about how to solve them? And what can we teach them so that they are prepared to go and on day one at a new company, look around and say, that looks like a redundant process. That looks like something we could use some tools to fix or to at least propose, at least give them the baseline knowledge so that they can grow from there and become the AI leaders of the future within these organizations.
I think what's going on here is so important and a really important model, because if we're going to change the workforce, I think you've talked about Duran and Simon Johnson. How do you change the economy? How do you create more good jobs? People aren't going to lose their jobs to AI. They're going to lose their jobs to people who know how to use AI better than they do. And so our educational system needs to teach people how to do that. And if we at MIT just do it here at MIT, that means we're doing it for a few thousand people. And we're not doing it in a way that creates social mobility, because at CCNY, I don't know how many of you know CCNY, they have 60% plus Pell Grants. This is not, MIT has 20% Pell Grants, and it's probably I think it is the highest one amongst the Ivy League equivalent. And we're super proud of that. They have 60%. That means these are super qualified people. Their average income is about $40,000, $50,000 a year. Yeah. You know who the number one breadwinner in their family is? Is that kid who's going to college, and it takes them 6 years to get a degree. So if we gave them a scholarship to come to MIT, they couldn't come to MIT. We need to meet them where they are. And so what Stephanie's doing, I think, is so important with everything that's going on. If we want to have a society that creates good jobs based on merit, not based on privilege to be able to get to places like MIT, I'm just so proud of what you're doing, Stephanie. It's super important.
We need that.
Yeah.
I mean, if when I think about how people talk about climate change and the urgency of solving that, the same thing with, I would call it the talent gap. Mm-hmm. We do not educate every single person we can educate in this country. When you look at the world demographics, our competitiveness relies on it. So I think it's not just a nice thing to do. I think it's an urgent thing to do.
The perspective that these students come with is largely missing in AI today, I would say, in training the models and in QAing the models, right? There was that super famous, like, doesn't recognize black faces, right? Like, how does that kind of thing happen? It's because you don't have diversity sitting at the table, and you don't have folks with this kind of a perspective who are building and leading in the space. Even if these aren't the technical talent that are training the models or building the models, or even if we can just teach them as a non-engineer how to use them and how to give them enough comfort and understanding so that they can then take it from there and go build on that foundation that we're setting for them. That perspective they're going to bring to the field in the future is super important because it's just missing.
Yeah.
I will say this, we so underestimate too. Like, the people who go there, Colin Powell went there, Felix Frankfurt, you look at their list of people, it is unbelievable the number of Nobel Prizes who come out of this place. And it's immigrants, and immigrants, they're right out of it. And we're kind of like, well, maybe we can get 40 of them for the program the first year. Tell them how many we have signed up already.
200, over 200, almost 250.
Over 200.
Yeah.
Over 200. Mel?
Bill, got a point here. I'm glad you said that, Stephanie. My youngest daughter, she's head of global communication for this firm, and one of the issues that she has is with bias in AI,
Yep.
which is really a problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
And how we address that is going to be really important. It's going to be very, very important when you talk about the diversity. So that's something that has to be addressed. It's great that there's going to be an enormous amount of economics that's going to come your way, but what about the other side, other piece of it? If they said bias, she said bias, she didn't say bigotry, she said bias in AI, but that leads to the other piece too. So we have to address that.
There's so much to be done, and it's all so important, and if we do it the old-fashioned way, we're never going to get it done. To your point, Heidi. True. Climate change, I was talking to someone who goes to all these meetings. They've come to the conclusion the only way to solve climate change at this point is AI. That's our best hope to do it. You mentioned this too, Lily. Yeah. And so we need to get the talent. We need to get it focused on this, and not just at MIT, and not just at Stanford, not just at, because as we know, some of the greatest entrepreneurs, some of the great thinkers, they don't come from the mainstream. Yeah. There was once this kid who was born out of wedlock to a Muslim father and a Catholic mother in Wisconsin.
Got a funny name too.
And he turned out to be, an orphan that was picked up and grew up, and that was Steve Jobs. Mm-hmm. Yep. You can go over and over again, Sam Zell, and you look at all these people. We have a saying, hungry dogs hunt best, and data shows that immigrants tend to start companies more than other people, and those companies are transformational. So we need to be all-inclusive in our entrepreneurship.
What I think is interesting right now about this gold rush that you mentioned, all these entrepreneurs that were out of the game, they're rushing back to get into it. VCs that were out of the game are rushing back to get into it. And so who might miss the wave, right? Who missed the last wave? Who's not necessarily invited to the table is sort of who we are now trying to make sure get that foundational knowledge so that they can show up and be at the table. And we're working with large companies to give these students projects. So how can these students learn what they need to learn? But more importantly, when they're in that interview, say, I have hands-on experience solving a business problem for big company A, big company B, big company C, right? Like we actually had real projects that we did over the course of the semester. So we're bringing on, one of our companies is having us do this really fun customer delight project. They're a consumer brand, and they're giving us a project to give to the students in the spring semester. And it's been on their list of things to do for a long time. They've been building up this AI capability internally, but it hasn't really pushed out to the business units, and it hasn't really been adopted. And the AI team isn't necessarily talking to the business unit teams. And so this project they're seeing as this really useful way to choose somebody from the AI side and somebody from the business and a problem that they've been wanting to work on, and give it to this team of students at CCNY this spring, where they're going to be able to work on it, and they're going to have these hands-on projects. And so we are still taking on a few more companies to be able to do these kinds of projects if anybody has a fun project for these students to do in the spring.
Just one positive and one risk in sort of this idea of inclusion, particularly on the entrepreneurship side. I think that an exciting thing that we're seeing is that in some ways it's never been easier to start a company, because you can build code, you can build product really fast and relatively leanly. And so we're seeing a lot of people bootstrap or try to scrape together certain things to get, and you can get pretty far in terms of like proving out a concept. You guys have built an amazing tool. And so I think that that's great because in some ways it lowers the barrier to people entering into the world of entrepreneurship. The other thing is there's a lot of capital out there right now. There's a ton of dry powder. And so there's VCs who are hungry to be jumping in. So I think that that's a good thing in terms of people entering. I do think that there is some risk, and I was just at an event, we were debating like what's the future of venture and how much is it going to be sort of automated away with AI. And we were trying to break down which pieces of it. And I think in general, there's a belief that, at least for early stage venture, what I do, I'll still have a job for a couple years because there's sort of a human judgment to it. But there are a lot of investors are starting to use more and more AI for sourcing and for surfacing founders. And that's basically LinkedIn scraping and using different data sets to surface, oh, this is likely a founder, or this is a founder you should be paying attention to. And what they're largely doing is sort of scraping, did you come from did you come from Google or OpenAI or Meta, and did you go to MIT, Stanford, or Harvard? And so I think my hope is that we'll, and so I think that hopefully that won't. I don't. I don't think venture's going too far in that direction yet. But most venture firms are using those types of scraping and surfacing tools. So there's positive in terms of inclusion and access and democratizing sort of the ability to start a company right now. But I think we also need to be careful of the bias in the algorithmic sourcing that a lot of VCs are using.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the biggest antidote to bias is inclusion. And I'm going to say something, I shouldn't say this in front of an MIT audience, but there should be no scarcity in education. It should not be 2% admission rates to get into the best universities when there are way more qualified candidates than those universities are taking. There should be no cost barriers. This is the biggest investment our country can make. And while I appreciate using scraping services to get to an elite university, to get to an OpenAI, to get to a Google, all of the things that we use as gatekeepers for that leave people out along the way. And they leave talented people out. And, and I would say if the one thing that ChatGPT should make everyone question, if an AI foundation model can produce, our brain is so much more astonishing than any model, and I'm building a model, than any model that could be ever built. If a foundation model can produce a college essay that has kept out kids that have dyslexia, that has kept out kids that didn't have privileged tutors, and all of those things, then we should revisit, is that the right screening mechanism for intelligence? And who are we leaving out of the system? Because how many more Steve Jobs are there out there that at some point got cut off from that opportunity? So I feel like I have to say.
No, that's I think certainly, if not all of us, many of us feel that in this room. And that's what we at MIT try to think about. This has always been the school of immigrants and immigrants' kids.
Yeah. One of the things that Lily said about there's a lot of dry powder. There's an enormous amount of money on the sideline. Access to that capital, it's not all equal.
No.
I can tell you, we're in the process of building, raising a $250 million fund to invest in young entrepreneurs, minority entrepreneurs. We're going to have to put a lot of our own money in there because the story you tell, well, what have you done in the past? Wait a minute. I said, wait a minute. Let me give you an analogy. You want to ask me how many points I scored, but you didn't put me in the game? That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. You got to let me get in the game, then I'll show you how well it will do.
Yeah.
And I've seen that quite a bit
Yep.
with some of the potential LPs, institutional LPs, which is not a good thing.
40% of the capital that's been raised by venture funds have gone to about 5 funds.
Yeah.
It's a big name, multi-state.
That's the whole point. Like, this is something that could be a whole nother conference, how technology has not flattened the world.
Right.
It's brought the bell curve tighter.
Yep.
I just want to bring out, that's why I never scored with the Celtics, Mel.
They didn't put you in the game?
So we've gone here, and I have to talk about the tool that Lily mentioned now, because I think this is just a complete game changer. If you have not seen this tool, go Google MIT Entrepreneurship, YouTube, and then Jetpack. Jetpack, Jetpack. We developed a tool before we knew it was going to be cool 5, 6 years ago, how do we help our students to become more entrepreneurial and bring that tool out to the rest of the world? Because that's MIT's terrible business model. We come up with knowledge and then we give it away to the world. So we incur all the costs. But we developed this model that takes how do you start a company, and basically if you have an idea and it takes you this long, you can come up with a business plan in 10% of the time to do that. Why is that? How is that possible? Because if you've ever started a company, you realize that most of what you do is backward-looking research. It's secondary market research. Very little of what we actually do is that creative part of it that we think we do, and that we then, how do we build the team, and then how do we test hypotheses and come up with something that's truly forward-looking. We think we do that, but we spend 90% of our time looking backwards. So this tool called the AI Assistant for Entrepreneurs, Jetpack, basically allows you to put in any idea. You can put in, I want to save democracy. I want to come up with I just do this live. I could do it if you want to see it, but they didn't want me to do it here. But you can give me any idea, and I can just run through it. I don't even need to understand the idea, but I can tell you who your customer is and who the potential first 10 customers are and what your business model should look like and the like. It's an assistant. It's not correct. But it allows you to take it and take an idea and streamline it and look at that very, very quickly. And if you see this video and you know anything about entrepreneurship, it will blow your mind. Make sure your seatbelt's fastened, your tray's in a locked and upright position when you watch it. Because we didn't even know. This was someone who got it, who had a serious business that they were trying to build, and we didn't even know how powerful it was because we've been using it in our classroom. And this goes towards how can you use it? And I think that this is where sometimes we miss it. We're staring at, like, what's the new release of ChatGPT? Yet there are all these little opportunities down here to just apply what we already have that we haven't done. And to me, this is kind of one of the things that we're super proud as well at MIT is we're going to make the barrier for entrepreneurship to be able to create entrepreneurs so much lower. And you don't need to come here. You can stay in Des Moines, Iowa, or you can stay in Tallahassee, you can stay in Wallace, North Carolina even, and you'll be able to go through and iterate on what can I do to start a company. Now that doesn't mean it's an assistant. You still need humans to do it. You still need humans to do it. But it takes all that stuff that you had to come here and get trained. And literally our students who took it, I was just with one, she goes, why didn't you have this when I was here a year ago? Well, we hadn't developed it. But this is the speed at which AI is going. And Lily, you said your industry is going to be disrupted. It will, I guarantee it's going to be changed. Educating entrepreneurship is going to be totally different 18 months now than it was before. It's going to be much less on how do you do all this secondary market research. It's going to be how do you go out and build a team? How do you think creatively? How do you do ethnographic research to see those things that the LLM systems are not doing? And maybe we can go to AI beyond LLM systems, but I don't understand that stuff. I'm lucky to understand LLM.
Well,
By the way, I could never understand blockchain. That was everything that I didn't understand about finance combined with everything I didn't understand about IT. I'm glad that thing passed. To me, the game right now is in LLMs that we just leverage what LLMs do.
Well, it's interesting because what's shifting is like what we look for in entrepreneurs and what are the qualities that we're assessing.
Yeah.
And as a side note, Heidi, will you hire me when I don't have a job in like 3 years? But it's interesting. We use this rubric. It's called the 5 A's, and it's basically ability, which is sort of like your entrepreneurial ability, your background, what have you done, your grit, your vision. Aptitude, which is how quickly do you learn. And the attitude, which is sort of do you have the charge the hill, take over the mountain, go get 'em attitude. Aware, which is how self-aware are you and how authentic are you and do you know your strengths and your weaknesses. And then attractor. So like how well can you attract your co-founder, your early hires, your first customers, advisors, and ultimately investors. But so that we've always used this rubric, and when we meet founders, we're kind of assessing, and we have different questions and ways that we work with them to assess it. And I think in this market, because of sort of the shift in technology, and it's going so fast, we're actually really doubling down on aptitude, on speed of learning and pace of learning, and we use this internal phrase called heat-seeking missiles. But it's like things are going to change. The markets are changing, the technology is changing, and so we're really betting on people and how quickly can they learn and find opportunity and iterate and integrate this new opportunity. And then the other piece that we're doubling down on is ability. And what I mean by that, and why I think it's interesting from an access perspective, is I mean, we're investing in a lot of very specific verticals, and how is AI being applied to those verticals. And where I think the uniqueness comes from isn't, are you an OpenAI researcher or an Anthropic researcher? It's like, how well do you know insurance or manufacturing or
Absolutely.
supply chain something? And so you know, or we're looking at HVAC systems and like HVAC people, you know what I mean? So I actually think people with a very different domain or skill set now can, if you can find the right way to access and integrate this technology that's available, you can build something extremely valuable that, you know, ex-engineer spinning out of Meta is not going to be able to do because they don't understand the intricacies of the workflow and the problems, or how to sell to those customers because they don't talk the talk.
Let me just, completely agree with that. And our example was, we don't write algorithms. People call up and say, how did you do this? We don't write those algorithms. We could use ChatGPT, we could use, Claude, we could even maybe use Gronk. Does anybody use Gronk? No. But
Elon does.
But it's not the algorithms underneath. It's the prompt library and it's the user interface. And to write a good integrated prompt library, you have to have deep domain expertise that you've tested it over time. And that's like when people Ethan Malik, when he looked at it, he knows all these things really well. He's like, oh my God, I have to relook at my prompt libraries now. And you have to have deep domain expertise to do those things. Yep. So I would agree. Heidi, do you agree?
I do agree. I mean, I think...
Don't be polite.
I'm still from New York, so I don't know, I'm just I'm thinking about it because I think we have this amazing moment in time where you can be a prompt engineer without having 10 years of experience and be really, really good at that and have unique experiences that are diverse and be able to create things with much less capital to start with and not from being in a geographic location that traditionally it was consolidated. And it's funny, we're a for-profit company, but one of the things that we offer for free, and Bill was one of our most popular guests on it. You remember Forecast? It's called ciforecast.com if anyone wants to go. And every week we feature a speaker who would be speaking at an event like this or speaking at a Davos. And we say, anyone who wants to come can come listen. And our theory on it is the stuff that we all get exposed to, that's not really the hard stuff. I mean, we all think it is because we spend a lot of time in it. If you can expose that and you can give that to people who maybe haven't been immersed in it and can see the world from a different perspective, you'll get much more interesting innovations to come out of that. So I'm agreeing in one sense, which is you want to have the diversity of experience, you want to take from unexpected areas, but it needs to be coupled with exposure and access to opportunity that comes from a lot of the educational institutions and doing it in a way that's much more accessible to more people. Yeah,
I think the past week elections showed us that two groups of the country aren't talking to each other.
Yeah.
So, all right, so we want to open it up to questions. And at this point, if there are questions, and we're going to reward you with the question by giving you a copy of the best-selling book from Wiley. Wiley, where are my friends from Wiley? Yes, best-selling book. What's the best-selling book, Shannon? Disciplined Entrepreneurship. Yeah, we know about that. Okay. First question will come from Bank Holmstrom. Bank, what's your question?
My biggest nightmare.
I had a question.
Yes, could you just identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Fran Karamuzis. I'm from Gartner, actually. So you talked a lot about the hype cycle, which is interesting. But my question was, and in the last panel, there was this metaphor that was used with chefs and cooks and things like that.
I like that.
And a lot of things that you guys talked about. When I heard that, what struck me is both those professions, chefs and cooks, are an apprentice model. You have to actually do them for many, many hours to be good at either being a chef or a cook. I was just wondering the things that you guys said. Do you think as we think about people going forward, you still have to have certain, experiential and apprentice kind of model, or do the things you guys talked about scale at really fast pace? So I'm from New York as well. So if you look at the CCNY model and you talked about 200 people, just think in your mind's eye if you were talking about 20,000 people. You know, do these things scale is really the question.
Can we get her a book, please?
And a sticker.
A
Where are
poster?
your stickers?
And a sticker, and a sticker.
So for this,
I want to go first on this.
you go.
Because this is one of the problems. It's like people say entrepreneurship, and there has to be an algorithm, you know, it has to be like a problem set. Entrepreneurship is a craft. It is not a science. Because the output, if you're doing entrepreneurship, it needs to be something novel, new, that's never been done before. So it can't be a science. It can't be an algorithm. It can't be rinse and repeat. On the other hand, it's not art like painting a picture or singing, because everyone here could be an entrepreneur. We know that. And we can get people better at it. It's like pottery and their first principles. But a craft has a few characteristics. It's accessible. There are first principles that you can learn to make it better. But it can't be taught in theory. It has to be taught with first principles and practice in an apprenticeship model. And an apprenticeship model means doing and having master craftsmen with you. So that would mean entrepreneurship is difficult to teach, but it's taught in an action learning type of way to give people to do that. So it will never, it's hard, very, very hard to scale. Like if you had a MOOC doing math, it's very easy to scale because there's a specific answer to every question. But to do a successful MOOC, which we did, it got to hundreds of thousands, didn't get to millions because everybody has to do an individual project to really get to the next level. But that doesn't mean we can't teach entrepreneurship at scale. Again, we have hundreds of thousands of people already. Entrepreneurship basically hasn't been taken as a serious field of study, and that's what we're trying to change. There are first principles that we know work. I'd encourage you again to go look at this tool and say, we need to take it, all that stuff that we're teaching that's kind of unrigorous now, take the rigorous stuff and make that, and leave the stuff that's the we call anti-fragile, grit, ability, types of creativity, and reduce that, and then we can scale it. But it will never be a cookie cutter thing. What's that?
Teaching now.
Are you teaching?
Are you teaching now?
Yes. Do you have a question, sir?
Well,
Mel has
Bill, you could just put it on TikTok. Everybody will get it.
No, people say that, people say I'm an inspiration. Because they look at me and they say, if he can do it, anybody can do it.
I think the thing that's interesting is that I think for job training, for example, I do think, let's take an associate at an investment bank. I think that we will get models in job coaching and training that basically says what's the best associate, and then everybody, all the associates coming in will get access to that. So I think that there will be sort of a evening of that, and getting access to mentorship, I think won't change the game on the baseline. But I do think that, again, as models get more sophisticated and people it gets integrated into more workflows, the things that will be the delta, or like sort of a weird way, like the mutants of the model will be humans and human attributes. So I think in some ways it almost raises the bar for some of these other qualities like creativity and judgment and the things that the models can't do well, because they can guide you to do an associate job in investment banking really well. But then what is the next level? Like, how are you actually going to outperform your associate class? What's going to be the delta? I think the bar moves even higher in some ways, but to the more human attributes versus just cranking on certain things.
All right, next question. I don't know where the mic is over here.
Hey, right here. Brendan Murphy. First of all, thank you for joining us and teaching us all these things. My question, I really appreciate you brought up bias, right? Because that's something that we deal with in terms of gatekeeping technologies all the time. And there's many forms of bias, right? So when we're, and even not just people with, being able to become an entrepreneur, but being able to, have that safety net, like you said, not be the primary breadwinner, actually have these social abilities to go out and kind of, be that risk taker. With LLMs, being built, one of the biggest issues with bias is that they're constantly built on previous existing data, right? So how do we both encourage people's trust in these in terms of decision making, and helping people identify, qualified opportunity zones away from coasts, stuff like that, but also, train new models that don't have this implicit bias? How do we balance and juggle both of those at the same time? While, this is a brand new technology that people are still coming to terms with their own fears and Some people think it's a Terminator, you know. So like, there's just, people are all across the spectrum in terms of understanding this. Thank you.
Heidi.
And then I want to hear your perspective on this. But I think there's an assumption that the status quo is better than it is. And the reason I'm optimistic is I think we live in an incredibly biased and inequitable world. And LLMs and other models give us the opportunity to question a lot of those things. So when I think every AI company I know that's got integrity has a responsible AI initiative going on in it. And that's because all of us start with the assumption that today isn't the best we can do. And so I think if you start with that assumption, it doesn't mean that what you're going to build is going to be better because you made that decision, but it means at least you're able to look and say, what exists today isn't what I want tomorrow. So for me, I start with that. The second thing is we have to have more trust in our institutions today than I think we do. And I'll give you an example. That series I mentioned, we're doing a session on mass incarceration. Now, what does mass incarceration have to do with AI? Well, one, you're taking a huge chunk of the talent pool out of the labor force. And I would say the biggest thing that's slowing down AI development today is the lack of talent. It's not the lack of capital. So there's one. Two, a disturbingly large number of innocent people are in prison. What does that mean? If we can't trust our institutions to be actively and honestly policing our communities, that means we can't trust our institutions when they make laws. It means we start to question elections. It means we start to question sort of the fundamentals of society. So I think if we're going to make a better future, we have to start from the assumption of like, what is broken today? And how can we use technology to make sure that it doesn't get exacerbated and accelerated going forward? I don't know if that answers your question, but that's at least how I think about it.
And Mel, I mean, it's kind of ironic that a bunch of Ivy Leaguers are sitting here talking about bias.
Well, you know, it's interesting because it's a great question, great question. I was sitting here and I was starting to go back over my history. Before I got a chance to be with the Celtics, I worked in corrections. My wife was a counselor at a women's prison in Pennsylvania. I was at Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, the big house they used to call it. And I was there for a few months, and I got out of that because I saw too many people that looked like me coming in. And I was there trying to figure out how to help stop the process. But I was told by the time they get here, there is no process, it's over. They'll finish. You got to try to get the other ones earlier. So I go, if that's the mentality, I'm out of here. So I left Lewisburg, and I find that really interesting because there were a lot of folks, like I said, that was like me, young, their life started, they got caught up in drugs or alcohol or whatever it may be, but they were just a flood of young folks. And I'm saying, they got to be talented. I could be one of those, you know what I'm saying? And then when I got into professional sports afterwards, I was in boardrooms. And wasn't a whole lot of folks in those boardrooms looking like me. I'm talking about CBS, the TV station. I'm talking about other boards that I was on, New Balance. I was like the Lone Ranger. And it's ironic that I began to think about the fact that there's something wrong with this picture. Whether we say it's a human mistake or whatever, there's something wrong with that. It has to be fixed. And if we don't fix this, and that's why I love what you're doing with the kids in New York, and if we can't scale, that's a problem. We've got to be able to scale this where we can fix the problems is an impediment to the growth of this country and the betterment of folks' lives here. I shouldn't have been the only one in the boardroom. And I was in the boardroom, the door opened up because of championship rings, okay? It didn't open up because of my intellect. It didn't open up because necessarily what I had accomplished in the classroom, because the classroom was very important to me. I used to say, and this is sort of an aside, sort of a joke, I used to say, they said, well, wow, you did so, I can't believe it. I said, yeah, you know, your idea of me, your thoughts about me is wrong. I stole books, okay? I wasn't out there doing all these wrong things. If you got to look at me as one of those, the one thing I did is I was in the books. And that's why my kids end up going to where the schools and stuff they went to, because it was such a hard thing for me to understand that you couldn't be as competitive in the classroom as I could be on the court. And so it was no excuse for my kids not to be able to get into the Ivy League schools and whatever, because this was an opportunity. So what you said, that's why this is such a great question. It can be fixed, Lily, it can be fixed. Will AI help us with that? Hopefully, if we can get the bias out of AI, then I totally believe that it can be done. And it has to be done, because I'm not running for anything. I stopped running a long time ago. But this is a great country. Forget about, we make mistakes, but this is a great country. And we want to make sure we continue to be great. And we do that by the intellectual capacity and the humanity side of us to help us get there. So.
Well done, ML. You should run for something.
I was just about to say, we could use you.
Let me just tell you, someone sent me this quote, and it's been something I live on. To what you just said. Someone said, right now, I want to repeat, this is from Eleanor Roosevelt, calling for optimism and action in the face of adversity and upheaval at the beginning of the Second World War. Eleanor Roosevelt urged the American public to consider that in the light of history, it is more intelligent to hope than to fear, to try than to not try.
Absolutely.
Thank you, ML.
Thank you.
All right, let's have some more questions. Over here, sir.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me? I'm Aldo Luevano. I'm a Sloan Fellows student, and I have a question related to the strategy.
What's your favorite course?
Entrepreneurship 101 for sure.
I love
it. I'm a tech entrepreneur. I have a company in Mexico. We are a deep tech firm that we are developing artificial intelligence solutions. And in this moment, we are evaluating to create a new product. And I would like to know what is the point of view that you have as a VC managing partner related to the implementation, right? Because normally you have two different approaches. The first one is to go straight forward to a laboratory and spend maybe 5 years developing the next big thing, your own LLM or your own machine learning model. And on the other hand, you can deploy layer on top, maybe using retrieval augmented generation, RAG, a solution in order to reduce the time to market of the product. What do you think about this strategy? What is more attractive for a VC in order to enable an investment in a short period of time?
Great. Lily, that's all yours.
Sounds like me, okay. I think it depends on, I don't think there's one right answer. I think it depends on what you're building and what will your source of differentiation be. So if the product that you're launching, and I don't know enough about the details, requires very deep technological work and R&D, or if you're building a foundational model or something that's very core and that will be the source of differentiation, then it makes sense to do that work to build that advantage. If that's not going to be the source of differentiation for that product, if it's something else, whether it's around distribution or a business model or access to data that you have that other people don't have, then I don't think you necessarily need to go that route. And I'm generally a believer of, I mean, I invest in software, so it's often the case that building and getting it in front of customers and getting feedback and getting iterations live in the wild is, in my opinion, generally a faster way to make sure that you're hitting a real pain point that customers are feeling. There are some cases where that's different. If it's a deep tech thing, if it's a foundational model, or if you're upheaving an entire sort of way of doing something, like Superhuman is a good example, and they're sort of famous for having spent many, many years and a lot of money sort of building their product, but it's because they knew exactly what they were building, and they had to get to parity to Gmail in order to be able to launch and be successful in it. So that's an example of like when it might make sense to go into your cave and build, but in most other cases, I'm a fan of figuring out how to get it out in the wild and then learning from it. And the other thing you can do is if you're using RAG in the beginning or something like that, you can figure out, you can sort of build differentiation in the background if that's what you think will end up being the enduring advantage while you're still testing with customers. At the end of the day, I think you need to be solving a top 3 pain point for a customer. And so you've got to make sure that what you're building serves that purpose. How's that for a non-answer?
Great, let's get another question. We can't see you there. All right, fire away.
I don't have a microphone, but is that
We'll get you a microphone.
Please do not call me the Wizard of Oz woman, as I've been called by everyone. I'll explain that someday. But one of the things that I'm working with an organization called 110, which is trying to prepare people who don't go to college to get good jobs.
Yeah.
And one of the things, as a professor down the river, I love being at MIT, but I am on the other side of the river at Harvard Business School. I always wonder, I'm being asked these days, very legitimately, why should you go to college? Why, this whole idea that you should take the $100,000 if someone might give you and start the business. I was talking to a young woman from the South Bronx, and she didn't accept her MIT, if you will, full scholarship. Instead, she took the $100,000, and I said, not too smart. This was me saying that to her, whether it's good or not, because of the relationships.
You talking about the Teal Fellowship?
Yeah, right. So she got $100,000, so she did that instead of coming to MIT and doing a full scholarship. I became a business professor because I'm interested in economic development, but I think making the argument for what do you get from going to college, I deeply believe in everything. I'm so excited by what we're talking about here, but I'm trying to understand if we're preparing people, the critical thinking, the judgment, et cetera. You can get that at many colleges. I think it's the amount of attention you get, whether or not you actually develop those. But how do we think about what's our special role for those who do come, if you will, to MIT or to my institution? And what are we doing that actually helps them use these technologies in a way and be entrepreneurs in a way that does actually make a difference to society? I know that's a big question, but that's what I've been very inspired by the conversation and some of the work I do myself. But I am trying to figure out, what's the advantage and how do we make sure we're preparing people because they do get these special opportunities? And what do we want them to turn out to be able to do with these technologies in a way that actually does allow them to build very profitable businesses that do improve our world?
David, it says we have 15 seconds to go.
You can take 30.
All right.
Not it.
So Stephanie, I'm going to take this one.
Go for it.
You can take the podium.
He's going to defend school.
Yeah, here we go. Defend MIT.
How can I say this nicely? That $100,000 to drop out of school is a bunch of garbage. Complete garbage. That is being put forth by someone who is trying to get an option on a young adult that is not their child. Do you understand that? I mean, you understand it, but I want everyone in this room to understand. Yep. That is an investor putting $100,000 on someone else's child to say, I think you could be the next Mark Zuckerberg because you could make me $1 billion. That's what's going on there. That's what's going on there, just to be crystal clear. Because they're not going to the places they say that they need to fix the school. They're coming to Harvard, they're coming to MIT to get, because those are the people they can make the money off. So would you want your child to do that? Would anyone, their child, want their kid to drop out of school as a young kid going to college? The answer is no, you would not. And we tell our kids, stay in school. There's always an opportunity. There are always opportunities out there. There will always be. And what you learn, and I went to college, believe it or not. I actually graduated. Mistake, but it was at Harvard, and they let anybody graduate at Harvard. But let me be clear, what you learn in college is not what you learn in the classroom as much as what you do. You go in as a child, essentially, into college, and you come out a young adult. And the skills you learn that Lily just talked about how to interact with other humans, you're not going to learn that on an LLM. And how do I motivate other people? How do I fall in love? How do I find a life partner? How do I learn to deal with people who don't talk about cost of customer acquisition and LTV all day, who might be in government, who might be in different things? That's what we do as educational institution. We create human beings who can run the world. And I'm damn proud of that. And when people come in and try to take other kids out of school to make an investment, I am deeply offended by that because they're not doing it to their kids. They're treating our kids as if they're a little investment, like a little stock, and they're taking away. Let me tell you, I don't know how many of you do. I'm sorry, David. I just
Keep on
stepped on a third rail. You mind if I preach here, brother?
Preach, brother.
Anyone here grow asparagus? Anyone here grow asparagus?
So curious.
Yeah. You grow asparagus. You grow asparagus. It comes up the first year. It looks beautiful. You cut that asparagus, and guess what? You have a fabulous meal of asparagus. And what happens if you do that? You will never get another stalk of asparagus. But if you let that asparagus grow for 3 years before you cut it, you will get asparagus for decades. And when we go in and we try to find these young kids to find the next Mark Zuckerberg and don't let them develop into full human beings, because when you go into a startup, you go to Y Combinator, they don't teach you how to manage people. They say, go get customers, make product. And we as educational institutions, what we do is we create talent, human beings. And that's what we should do. And a colleague, we played basketball together, mostly sat and watched basketball in college, Charlie Baker. He's the governor of Massachusetts. And we were at this thing, and someone said, how do you build an entrepreneurial ecosystem? And I was standing up because I'm the entrepreneur. I'm going to talk to him about it. And he said, no, I got this, Bill. I'm like, Charlie, you've never started a company. And he goes, watch this, Bill. And Charlie Baker stands up, and he says, it's easy. And I'm like, oh, my God, this is getting out of control here. He said, it's easy. All you need to do is you need to have Harvard and you need to have MIT settle in your state and wait 150 years. And he was right, damn it. Because it's about talent. It's about creating people. We teach people how to fish. It's not about catching a single fish, right? And an investor, no offense, Lily, I think you'd agree, if they try to go in there and try to get that asparagus before it's ripe, we as a society lose the decades that they could produce that. They could be catching fish for decades. This is quite a mixed metaphor at this point.
We got asparagus, we got
I'm a little
fish.
hungry here.
I'm hungry.
I'm on a roll. Are you with me?
Yeah.
We have some carbohydrates with it.
Some carbohydrates. I believe deeply that educational institutions teach people how to fish and do things. We should not be investors. We should be educators that teach people how to fish. It's up to Lily to help the fish once they leave here and they grow up and they and they can catch other fish. So don't buy into the fact.
I'm not going to buy into it. The thing is,
Well, let me preach though, man. Let me preach, all right? No, go ahead.
No, I just think that we have to make the case.
Okay?
Or what exactly, I just think we need to make the case of where, there are different ways you can get these kinds, some of it is life experience. So I agree with you completely. As I said, I told her, call MIT back immediately and tell them you're taking a gap year, you were confused.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I do think that we have lost, people don't understand what they will get, what they will learn that will actually help them, particularly if they think they can go on and look at a YouTube video. And I know you don't mean this. I agree with everything we're doing in terms of access, but I think we as institutions need to look at ourselves to see, are we really developing in people what they need to know and how they need to be and what, if they're going to actually begin to build the kinds of businesses we hope they will build. And you have to make the argument really for why does it matter if you're a human being if you want to be a successful entrepreneur? I'm not disagreeing with you, but I don't know that I know how to articulate it. So you're helping me.
Yeah,
I
so
have disciplined entrepreneurship. So anyway,
Yeah,
I just wanted to,
that will help you.
that is
that
my
might be
issue.
helpful.
I believe completely, as I almost
all right, so
died when she told me this.
So let me just give you data, because we at MIT like data. We did a 10-year longitudinal study by an outside professor, tenured professor. She's presenting this right now. 10-year study about how our students do coming out of here. Let me just give you a little data about how they do. These students come in, they're sitting here. People like Aldo, they're lost. They're trying to find their way in the world, all right? No, he's already an entrepreneur, but these are students who start from 0 miles per hour. They go through our whole program. What do you think their success rate that they're in business 5 years later? Guess. Anybody? 25%? 10%?
90%.
69%. What are you talking about, man? You're ruining the whole drama here. Right? 69% of them are still in business. 69% are still in business.
Awesome.
Yes, yes. We make everything we do, we make generally available. I'll give you this, we'll give you the electronic version. 69%. 63% of the 100% of them raise outside funding. So they're not just consulting companies. 89% are directly aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So they're not doing dating apps or some cryptocurrency bullshit. You know, these are actually real companies. Cool. And guess what?
I love it.
You know, and by the way, the ones who don't, their companies don't, they go on to raise $2 billion because we've taught them how to fish. So in total, this study shows they've raised $3 billion. And the other thing is, you'll find very interesting, is that over half of the CEOs happen to be female. Hear that?
Yes.
Half of the CEOs. Yes. I'm not talking about one. And so this including and giving people equal playing platform, and they perform. And this is what we're trying to roll out at CCNY and figure out to the question of scaling. So are we communicating it well? That's what you need to do at Harvard. Like, we do the hard work, you can communicate it, all right?
That's good. That's good.
Do you want to say something?
No, I think you better take the mic here. No, well, wait, I want to thank our panelists. Lily, I didn't give you a chance.
Oh, it's okay. My only point I was going to say is the #1 reason why startups fail. Anybody know?
People.
It's people. It's team. Teams implode. And so it's sort of the question of why. You can automate the rest of building the business, but if you can't manage a team, that's the #1 reason companies fail.
So I want to thank the panelists. Lily Lyman, a great investor. Come see her.
Thank you.
Stephanie MacConnell, leading our efforts at CCNY, great educator. ML Carr, a philosopher. And Heidi, a huge put a dent in the universe entrepreneur. Thank you very, very much. Thanks for having us, Sinan, David.
Great.